right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Contemporary Art Museum, St. Louis. We're thrilled this evening to have with us our guest, Farah Al Qasimi, whose wonderful exhibition is here on display on the project wall here at CAM. We're going to start tonight's program. I'm going to do a kind of formal bio of Farah, and then I'll turn it over. She's going to share some things, and then we'll break out into a conversation, and we'll save some time at the end for question and answer. So please keep note of any questions you have along the way, and we'll make sure that there's enough time to hear from all of you. So Farah works in photography, video, and performance. Her recent commission with the Public Art Fund, Back and Forth Disco, was on view at 100 bus shelters in New York City in 2019 and 2020, and it was named one of the best artworks of the year by The New Yorker. Her work has been featured in exhibitions at the Jameel Art Center in Dubai, the San Francisco Arts Commission, CCS Bard Galleries at the Hessel Museum of Art, the List Visual Arts Center at MIT, the Museum of Contemporary Art Toronto, and the Houston Center for Photography. She's participated in residencies at the Delphina Foundation in London and Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture in Maine. She's a recipient of the New York Nada Artadia Prize, the Aaron Siskin Individual Photographers Fellowship, and this year's Capricious Photo Award. Her work is in the collections of the Museum of Modern Art, the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum, the Museum of Guggenheim Abu Dhabi, the Tate Modern, Museum of Contemporary Art Chicago, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, and the Museum for Photography in Amsterdam. Farah received her MFA from the Yale School of Art. Her exhibition, Everywhere There Is Splendor, is a new site-specific work on view here at CAM through February 27th, 2022. This exhibition is generously supported by Alexis Kosei and Eric Karanek, and the Strive Fund, with special thanks to Helena Ann Rother. So I want to turn it over to Farah and let you take it over, and then I'll come back on in a little bit.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. This is my first time giving an artist talk in person since 2019, so it's a little crazy to be doing it and actually making eye contact with people and not speaking into a Zoom void. I even made like a very tacky Zoom background for this purpose because it just felt bad to have people seeing my like living room and my boxes and my like, takeout behind me. So it's so nice to be in the space with you. And I also just wanted to talk, I have something that I'd like to read, but I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much to Wassan and everybody at the museum, Misa and Sheldon and Jen and Michelle and everybody who has made this show happen, because it really is such an opportunity for artists to get to show in a space like this and to have the support curatorially, just to be able to figure out some material questions. I don't have a space like this in New York City. I don't have a studio. I work out of my apartment. I don't really have a way to answer some of the questions that I'm thinking about spatially. And so museums like this one are really just so important for artists. And I just want to reiterate that it's such a joy to be here in person and to be able to have worked on this through a very dark year. So I'm so happy to be able to talk to you about it now. So I wrote something formal about this show, but it's very short, so don't worry. Basically, I just wanted to be very sensitive about the way that I talked about it, because a lot of it is about my family. And so I wanted to give some of them the opportunity to speak for themselves. So this person right here, this is my Aunt Kathy. I asked her to say a few words about the show for me, and her first reaction was, "Wow, I'm so tall." And her second reaction was, "Finally, I'm famous." And she thought about it a little bit more, and she said, this is her quote, she said, "It made me very nostalgic to look at this picture again. It brought me right back to that day. It was my birthday, and my mom made me a cake. I was newly married. I was so young looking, just turning 22. So this is me. I grew up in the United Arab Emirates, where my father is from, but this work is for and about my mother's family, who immigrated to the northeastern US from the Lebanese mountain village of Mdouha in Waves. First in 1898, I had a great-grandfather who came through Ellis Island to be a peddler, which is just an annoying, version of a telemarketer back then, where they would come and just knock on your door and sell you things you didn't want. And then they came again in another wave of immigration in 1952. I was locked in our family house in Massachusetts for most of 2020. And there was a cabinet where my grandmother's leather-bound picture albums were kept. So although the color in them faded, the world in them felt frozen and timeless, but still full of spirit. And the photographs mostly traced her family's immigration in various roads. So some of them went to Canada, some to the northeastern US. Some people actually ended up in Central and South America. And so they would use these pictures, either personal photographs or studio pictures that they would commission, to just send each other and say, hey, this is what we're up to now that we're far away from the village of Mdouha. This is how we're doing. This is what we look like. So I spent night after night with these photographs, paying attention to the objects in them for some greater sense of what everybody was like back then. I wanted to know what they might have sounded like, what they cared about, what they ate, how they smelled. And my grandmother died when I was 8. I never knew my grandfather, and I have never been able to travel to Mdouha. So I felt a need to fill in these craters of knowledge about my own origins. I collected a lot of anecdotes from aunts and uncles, and I wrote them down. And I later began scanning and reprinting the albums to expand the stories and micronarratives within them into a more layered space. And so that is the work, a lot of the work that you see here is a result of that process. My work is mostly research-driven, and I struggled with a decision to make work that sprung from personal narrative and family history. And I'll talk a little bit more about why that is later. So when she first came to America, my grandmother didn't speak English. She could not read, write, or drive, and she had 6 children to support. She was a skilled cook, and she found work at a local hotel preparing food for the lunch buffet. That's actually where the title of the show comes from. So my grandmother worked at the Hotel Kimball in Springfield, Massachusetts. And everywhere there is splendor is a quote from one of the developers talking about how he would imagine the Kimball as this place of, just luxury and just absolute extravagance everywhere. So her co-workers were other Lebanese women whose relatives had brought them over in ships and planes in search of better lives. She worked preparing food in the lunch buffet, and she used to tell funny stories about her friends forgetting that they weren't in the old country anymore. So one of my favorite stories that she told, and I remember it vaguely, but she has this story about one of her best friends who, they would take the local bus together, and her friend would always try and bring livestock on the bus. And there was one time where she brought a chicken on the bus, and the bus driver was like, "You can't do that, ma'am." And she was like, "I don't understand why. I'm going to eat this chicken later. This is my food." So just things like that have sort of gotten lost in translation over time, but those anecdotes, I think what I'm trying to argue is that those things are so important because they tell us more than the kind of, just biographical, indexical information of, how we talk about time passing. It's actually those little moments where we think about the sort of culture shock that generation must have felt. So at the hotel, they made tomato juice cocktail, potato salad, they chiffonaded herbs and sliced eggs for crab louis, other disasters of the 1950s. My grandmother found out that she was allergic to shellfish when she was tasked with preparing the shrimp cocktail. So growing up in the mountains, she just never touched a shrimp until that moment in the hotel kitchen in Springfield. Several years later, when kitchen work became too much for her legs, she found a job sewing the linings of winter coats for the Chicopee Coat Company, which no longer exists. At home, she still cooked, though. She made hummus the proper way. So she made it by shelling chickpeas one by one after soaking them overnight. So if any of you were hummus makers during the pandemic and remain so, I'm here to tell you, don't listen to anyone else, that the secret is that you have to remove the shell from each chickpea one by one. And it's maddening, but it's also incredibly calming. It's good to do if you're on the phone with someone or if you have a friend nearby to talk to. But it's the only way to get the creamiest hummus. Don't listen to anyone who tells you about baking soda or about anything else. That's the only way. So she used to do this. It's a process that requires immense patience and dexterity. She also spent hours stuffing grape leaves with rice and meat for warak anab, which is a staple dish in any Lebanese household. It's just grape leaves. She did this in her kitchen on Caseland Street in Springfield, Mass. This is a close-up of the wallpaper in that kitchen, which you can also see in this image. So this kitchen had the kind of wallpaper that every American had in the 1970s, so some psychedelic floral paisley combo, usually pinks, yellows, greens. I'm sure many of you here who survived the interior decor of the 70s will remember this. And through looking at these photographs, I began to understand that design and decoration were more than just that, right? They weren't just decisions free of meaning. They were ways to express and claim an identity and a space for oneself in a strange and often difficult world. And so I wanted to think about the color pink and what that meant, and that's sort of one of the reasons why this is such a pink and mauve forward show. I think a lot of it was really present at the time, in interior decor magazines, and thinking about how to translate a kind of femininity in one's home. And so I think that these were things that my family was certainly picking up on. So as a teacher, I often get asked by my students, is my personal experience enough to make work about? What determines a story as significant enough to make work with? And most of all, how do we photograph the things we don't know and the things we can't see? This work was a way for me to attempt to answer those questions. As someone who grew up feeling lonely and isolated, I found the urge to stay alive and curious by reading books and watching movies. I identified with the first-person narratives in science fiction novels, and I found refuge in music when language failed me. I believe now that all stories are significant because all stories are true, and we can photograph the things we can't see by reinterpreting them, by reframing our ideas around what visibility and clarity can offer. We return to photographs when we cannot access a person or a place or a memory. So much of their significance and meaning is embedded in what they don't show. And so this work is a way for me to acknowledge those unknowns and bring my own layer of time and understanding to the past. So that's what I have written about this show, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more specifically about the individual pieces in it. But I also wanted to bring up an older work that I think really relates to this problem of how do you photograph things that are invisible, or how do you photograph the unphotographable? As somebody who comes from a very traditional photo practice, I studied at Yale, where many of the kind of street photographers of the 50s and 60s came from. Walker Evans was a big part of that program. I'm also thinking about people like Lee Friedlander, Gary Winogrand, all people whose work was about just observing, right, and being present in the world, and seeing things as they were. And I find that is a problem for me because I grew up in a place where I didn't necessarily have as much access to public space as some of my counterparts. And I feel that way here too, in different ways. So the next body of work I want to talk about is called Nar, so that translates to Mother of Fire. And it's a selection of photographs, but it's also a feature-length film, the first that I ever attempted. And it all started when I became interested in this idea of ghosts and exorcism. So in the United Arab Emirates, there is a very strong belief in jinnis, which I don't know if anybody has heard about jinnis, but they're basically spirits in the religion of Islam. They're not said to be good or bad. They're just kind of around us in many ways. They're just sort of spirits that are present but undetectable. And a huge part of our tribal culture was community prayer and community exorcism around people who were afflicted. Now, there are ways that we talk about that in, contemporary culture that are maybe a little bit more dismissive of those beliefs. So we might say, okay, that person had epilepsy, or that person, was schizophrenic, and that's why they were behaving that way. But I'm actually interested in the things that we can learn from not dismissing those methods of community healing and dance and release. So I went to go speak with an exorcist, which, by the way, they're very hard to find now. I had to message maybe 6 people. It was like a whole covert experience on WhatsApp. And I found one man who would talk to me. And these events are also outlawed by the government now because they're considered to be sort of antiquated and primitive. So I spoke to this man, Ahmed, and I spent 3 hours with him. He was telling me about the process of an exorcism, and he stopped halfway through and he started shaking in his seat. And I was like, "Are you okay? Can I help you?" And he looked at me and he was like, "You're not here because of your film." And at this point I was really freaked out and was like, "Oh God, what did I get myself into?" And he continued to shake, and then he looked at me and he was like, "You're not here because of your film. You're here because you have the most strong jinn possession I've ever seen in anybody in all of my 40 years. So I was like, "Oh God, uh-oh." And so then it got a little wacky after that. He was like, "That's why you're 27 and unmarried." So if anybody's looking for love and hasn't found it, maybe go see this guy. But he really believed it. And in that moment, my beliefs wavered as well around what I knew about myself. And that was a really important moment for me to think about how belief functions. And in a world in which having proof of something doesn't mean anything. Anything can be fabricated, anything can be, completely doctored to twist the truth. He also would not let me film his face, so I had 3 hours of just audio material talking to an exorcist, and I thought, how the hell am I going to make this film? So it's kind of a similar problem to how am I going to photograph my grandmother? How am I going to talk to her and ask her about our family history when she's not here? I can't talk to her. I can't speak to her. All of the stories that are left behind are just kind of hearsay or anecdotal. So I ended up making a horror comedy, and I'll play you the trailer.
أنت مثلا تقول وأنا الماروي وتقول ماروي وأنا الماروي.
My name is Manar. Manar, it means mother of fire. I am a jinni, which is a spirit that has the power to possess humans. I feel myself getting weaker, lonelier. All the jinns I used to know have been scared into the mountains. The people believe in us less and less, and we lose our power. I don't know why they want me gone.
So the story of Manar is that she is a jinni, right? And she's played by me. Her costume is made with a hotel sewing kit, so clearly I did not get a degree in costume design. But I thought about having a centralized character who could actually embody all of the problems that I had been thinking of and trying to make that straightforward documentary. And so it took about a year to make. It was a very modest production in the sense that it was me and 2 friends. And I ended up doing all the filming and the music, and you can really tell when you listen to it that it's somebody's first attempt at a film, but but I like that about it because I think it's somehow in line with some of the DIY aesthetics that are a part of my practice. And so this ancient jinni is going through the motions of really mourning the loss of her standing in society. She feels that people no longer believe in her, they no longer fear her, and she's lost her power. And so at the same time, it's sort of a commentary on state power and the shifting of values as as decided upon by the government at the time. So a lot of people who were more spiritual in nature, whose jobs depended on this belief in the supernatural, all of a sudden had to go out of hiding and were rendered less significant to society. And there are people in the mountains who are medicinal healers. There are all kinds of knowledge and information that are more connected to intuitive kinds of knowledge, to the spirit world, to herbalism. And so it was part of a way for me to talk about this problem of modernization and what gets left behind through the, this sort of, metaphor of this jinni. And the important thing about that film was that it was part documentary, so there are people in there talking about their very real experiences with jinn possession. And, and that footage is played alongside this kind of silly jinn going on this journey of reclamation where she ends up stealing some of her artifacts from a local museum. So it's long, but I think that it was a way to really get at things that were impossible to find in the real world, or impossible to get permission to find. So I like to sit in that work a little bit, in that space of not knowing, in that space of really figuring out the challenge of photographing the impossible. So there were photographs that accompanied this as well. A lot of the work had to do with the gender divide as well, the growing gender divide in the country, which I believe is a response to colonial presence, so I actually blame it on the Brits. And I think a lot of the people have a misconception that Islamic culture is very much about dividing men and women. It's backwards in that way. But my interest is really looking at the whole history of it and how certain ideas come up in opposition to others. So this piece is called Perfume, Men, Women, and so you can see that there's one for the men, one for the women, and those ideas come up in this show as well. Like in the photograph of the pink soap, there is actually on the other side of that bathroom, in the house that it's in, there's a blue bathroom for the boys. So these ideas of color coding, this is our house that is supposedly next to a haunted village in the Emirates. Have you been to Jazirat al-Hamra? Yeah, haunted, right? Very haunted. This is an install shot of what that show looked like. This is my father's bedroom in that house. And I think it's important to note that when I work with collage, it's not digital, it's collaged in space with paper. But that really only exists in this show. Every image that you see here was made just in camera. So this image is just a reflection of a good friend of mine in a piece of artwork that looks almost like she's a ghost. Very precarious image. And I also, one thing I'd like to mention, since I do get this question a lot, that I like to think about photography as an art form in its own right, in the sense that it's not important for me to distinguish between whether an image was set up or whether an image was found. And that's because I do work across that spectrum. I do work as a street photographer sometimes. I do try to be invisible and to be outside in space and just observing things that feel right to me. But then I also have an idea for an image that sometimes comes from a long process of thinking about something, or sometimes even a dream. And I think with a lot of this work, I like that that line blurs. And I do photojournalism work in which I am not allowed to make any changes at all. So that I think of that really as a separate endeavor, but this work feels like, it feels like a place where I can ask complicated questions around truth and belief. And then maybe I'll just briefly talk about 2 other projects and then we can have a conversation. So Wasan mentioned Back and Forth Disco, which was a project that I did with the Public Art Fund in New York City in 2020. So it opened in January of 2020, which meant that for many months it was the only artwork that you could safely see in the city because it was outside. And so they do this partnership with JCDecaux, the advertising company, where a company lends Public Art Fund 100 bus shelters all around New York City, every borough. And so these spaces that are normally used for advertising imagery, you know, usually companies that can afford this kind of advertising space, and they lend them to artists, and so they'll run a sort of season that's one artist making new work that goes on these shelters. And I decided to make a sort of love letter to New York, and it was the first time that I had ever photographed solely in New York. I was thinking a lot about how people become anonymous in public space, how often it is the loneliest and the most solitary place that you can be when you sort of blend into a crowd. And I was also thinking about how so much of New York City is sustained on small immigrant-run businesses, much like the businesses that my family's run. And so I wanted to honor these businesses by bringing them into the public sphere, by giving them advertising space that they ordinarily would never really have access to. So these are some images out in the wild. This was a plant store near my old neighborhood. This is a Palestinian-owned gift shop in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn. This was also a Palestinian-owned barbershop, and they made sure to install this not far from the actual barbershop so that the owners and the patrons could come out and see this is where we go all the time, and now it's all of a sudden reflected in our public architecture. And then the last body of work I'll talk about, this was a show that went up right before the lockdown. So I did 2 big things in 2020, and then I did lots of nothing. So this was a show that I did at my, the gallery that I work with in New York. And it was meant to sort of be a community space. And we had this orange carpet installed, but obviously most of it was closed down for 2020, so we weren't able to use it in that way, but we had planned to have readings, we had planned to have music shows, and the sort of idea of the show was thinking about photography as a fun house of mirrors, as a medium that's able to reflect the world back at itself with often precision and sometimes, you know, mockery, sometimes humor, sometimes amplification, and there was a lot of, I think, fun work in this, or work that felt like it came from a place of celebration and joy. I think an important thing about this body of work was that it was not geographically tied to a specific place. So half of it was made in and around the US, and then the other half was made in the Emirates, just because those are the 2 places that I spend most of my time. So this image was made in Dearborn, Michigan, and these are 2 young girls who are recent immigrants from Syria, but you can see that they have these recognizable symbols of American culture like Elmo and Barbie. Maybe I'll just flip through these and then we can start talking, and if you have any specific questions about particular images, I'm more than happy to answer them.
Thank you, Farah. I was thinking maybe we could dig into a couple of details around the work that's here on display, and have you talk a little bit more. You touched on this a little bit, but I think one of the things that's interesting about looking at this work and thinking about your inspiration coming from family albums is, which is new for you. This is a kind of new direction that came out of your time
Yeah.
during COVID. So one of the things that's interesting is thinking about like the scale shift, like the intimacy of family albums and the way that we all like can remember or experience family albums for those of us that are old enough to have family albums like that. You know, there's like this intimacy, right? Like you know, the scale is very different than what what you envisioned for this space. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about if that has any significance or how you thought about that when you were approaching this work.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't often see family photographs, you know, at a sort of monumental scale. And I think most of us think about family photographs as these like unskilled objects, right? That they're not things that were made by artists. They're regular people who are using cameras to document their lives. And I think that lack of preciousness is actually what makes them so incredible. I've seen so many, you know, family photographs of my families or my friends' families, and I'm like, oh my God, that could be in the Met. That's beautiful. And so my idea with these was to just really blow them up to a different scale where you're able to look more closely at those details that I was talking about. And then to also bring these people into a space where I think, you know, museums are important cultural spaces. And so I think a lot of the members of my family felt unrepresented by American culture for such a long time. You know, I think I remember, and this may be somebody that I know from grad school, but I think Marvel just announced their first Muslim superhero, and he's Egyptian. But it's like 2021, you know? So it's so crazy to think that we're still only having those firsts. So I wanted to really bring them into this space in a way that honored their significance in my life and in their own lives.
The other thing that I think is interesting is how you make these works. So you said it kind of briefly, where you said, you know, that these are not digitally manipulated, but I think it's interesting for people to hear you talk a little bit about, like, when we're looking at this work, you know, how are you're physically creating these scenarios and photographing them. Mm-hmm. Why is that important kind of on a methodological level for you? Like the shrimp is not really in your mouth, right? Yeah, no, which I asked you about. So like maybe that's a good one, or even just the image above that, right? With the flowers and the shells and the joy, the Farah detergent.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, see, there's a lot of little jokes in there. Yeah, the shrimp is not really in my mouth. I actually don't eat shellfish. It's a plastic shrimp, and it's on a print out of my mouth. And I think part of it is that I find it much easier to answer spatial questions when I have things physically. I'm not really a good digital person. I don't do digital collage well. I'd be a terrible graphic designer. I think it only really makes sense when I can touch the thing and crumple up the surface. And so that third panel right there with the Joy detergent, that was great because I had printed and then reprinted and then thought about all of these different objects that could go over the images, which are the fake shrimp and then also seashells from the northeast coast and from the Emirates, so things that I collected from both coasts that I'm from. And then the flower image, just so you know, that's actually taken from a translation textbook for people who are learning to translate Arabic into English. And so it's not necessarily crucial that everybody understands all of those things, but if you choose to spend time with the show or with the text, I think that some of those details do come out slowly.
Can you talk about the throats?
Yeah, it's so funny because I was looking at the files for them on my computer the other day, and I was like, oh, gross. But then when I look at them in the space, they take on a different quality, for me at least. If you all still think they're gross, I will support that opinion. But I think what it is about them is that I think, first of all, they're so closely related to this like mauve pink color story that's so indicative of that time. But I was thinking of them as a self-portrait, really. And I was making them, again, at the time that I was looking at these family portraits, and I had no interest in photographing myself. I don't really make self-portraiture. But I started photographing the back of my throat because I was convinced that I had COVID. And I didn't. Knock on wood, I have not yet had it. But I think that I did it once and I thought, this is a photograph of the inside of me. And how often do we get to take photographs of the insides of ourselves that we have ownership over? I mean, I'm sure many of you have had x-rays or colonoscopies or endoscopies or whatever, MRIs. We have these images that, you know, we sort of allow other people to take of ourselves that just reduces us to what we are, which is essentially a bunch of blood and guts and bones and biology, right? And so for me, this was a way to think about that process, but make it self-guided. And so I started to scream each time I took a new image. I started to scream, and I started to think about how I could get wider and wider and deeper, as if that would give me some part of my DNA that would, you know, it would give me a clue about what I was made of and how I was connected to all of this. So for me, that set of images, it's not even necessarily about how it looks or what's happening, but it's about, I think it feels to me like like the proof, the document of a moment in time, of that desperate urge to need to know more, and to look at our DNA for that, you know, and it is a privilege to have, you know, a certain amount of knowledge about one's own DNA or one's own history. So for me, that's as close to a straightforward self-portrait that I think I may ever get, maybe. And so it was important that they were seen together, because the sequence of the widening and the searching and the screaming, I think it's the one image on this wall that feels like it is charged with a kind of anger or desperation.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's not uncommon that you somehow put yourself in your work, not in all of your work, but there's definitely kind of examples of that you've shown today, you know, through the slides, but also in this work where you're physically present in the work, which is also interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know if anyone caught in the trailer, but I am actually Baba Ali. I am the exorcist, the guy playing the keyboard. You might not notice it, but I have a cool pair of Oakleys on and I'm dressed like a man. Honestly, and it's interesting to me because the more I do this work and the more time I also spend in the archive, the more I realize that there are connections, you know? At some point as a kid, I wanted to dress like an Emirati man because that signified power and that signified, like, I don't know, a kind of mystique to me. And then I did it again as a 27-year-old, 28-year-old, you know, playing an exorcist. So I think I'm in my work, usually in my video work, I'm in it, but it's a little bit more performative, or I'm wearing a costume, or, you know, there's like a layer of camp to it that removes me as a serious artist.
I have a picture of myself like that too, in the same outfit.
We all wanted to be our dads.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the curse of the Islamo-patriarchy, of any patriarchy. You're always like, you know, you want to be Baba. Babas are cool.
Yeah. Well, the outfit's also fun to put on, so.
Oh yeah, it's so cool.
I guess I'm also a little bit curious about this slight turn in your practice of really, this is kind of the first time that you're making a work that's so directly related to your personal history, particularly, I mean, so directly that you're taking images from family albums. And I'm just wondering if this has, I don't know, impacted or shifted the way that you're thinking about how you move forward, or if this feels like sort of a moment in time that was really reflective of, you know, living through a global pandemic and not being able to kind of move so freely, and maybe it's sort of just like a body of work and then you move on? Or do you feel that there's some way that this kind of chapter is going to kind of carry through or is going to inform what you might be thinking about moving forward?
Yeah, I think it will carry through. I think partly because, you know, I think that ideally, you know, artists should be making changes that reflect what's happening in their daily lives. And I think when COVID happened, everybody had to change their approach. Maybe not like painters who were making, you know, who were already locked in their studios for 24 hours a day, making like, you know, certain kinds of work that didn't require interfacing with the outside world, that were, you know, it's actually really interesting to hear Shara talk about her work because it feels like so much of it is internal. And I love thinking about how different people's approaches to their practices are in that way, and that need to, like, you know, correspond with the outside world. And I have always romanticized that way of working. I wish that I could be a painter that like lived in a lighthouse, you know, and like painted the sea and never spoke to anyone, but had like 6 dogs. But I don't know, I think for me, the rug was pulled out from under my feet. You know, going outside and talking to people and having new experiences is it's my lifeblood. So it was really hard not to do that. And I actually ended up spending most of quarantine learning how to sew badly and then giving all of those things away to my friends who didn't want them. So I think that it will continue because I had never thought about how, okay, I have these things in front of me. How can I actually address them in the space that I have? How can I actually think about location and scale and aesthetics? How can I embed the meaning by the relationship between those objects and the way that I shift the scale of them? You know, and so I think that was a really important, a really, really critical formal lesson to learn that I think will always carry through my work in different ways. So yeah, I don't think ideally you're always in a place where you're learning, and I think anytime it feels comfortable, there should be something pushing you into the unknown. But I think also teaching helps me do that too, because I'm looking at my students who are constantly reevaluating how they're working, and I just think that that's a really, really great way to be as a human being, not just as an artist.
This might be a good moment for us to kind of see if there are questions from the audience. I think Michelle has a microphone, so if you have a question, just please raise your hand and we'll get you a microphone.
Thank you for your talk and having the conversation today. I'm wondering, you didn't speak much about the project with the architecture biennale. Is it possible to share any word on that work too, and how you kind of like span these collaborative projects? You shared a bit about some collaboration so far and working with other people and giving things away, but like that project is like so massive and so distant to St. Louis, so it'd be great to hear a little bit about it as well.
Yeah, thank you, Khalil. That's a great question. I don't think I have images of it here, but I think the project you're referring to was the commission I did for the Venice Architecture Biennale. So I was invited to work with the United Arab Emirates National Pavilion at the Architecture Biennale that happened this year, a year late, and I could not go, unfortunately, but the theme was really, really interesting. It was about these sabkhas, which are salt flats that occur naturally across the coast of the UAE from the extremely, you know, I don't know how to say it, but there's a really massive desalination project all across the country. And so water is desalted and then the leftover is just dumped back into the ocean. So the water, it has a very high salt content. And then a lot of the time these marshlands develop that are just crusted over with salt. Sometimes they're marshy depending on the time of year and the wetness. Sometimes they're just absolutely flat, beautiful, otherworldly. Has anyone seen Dune yet? Yeah, I loved it. I mean, I love sci-fi, right? But it was my first time seeing, like, I'd never seen Timothée Chalamet on a screen before, or in anything. And that was the moment that I was like, okay, I'm definitely too old for this. But it's a great movie, and the landscape is like, it's not similar, but it has, there's something sort of dystopian, but also beautiful and untouched about the crispiness of the salt. And so I did a site visit and I made some photographs for the pavilion. And what was so interesting about it was that we came together, we had this like business meeting about it, but then we did a site visit, and that was really where we had this collective experience that was the collaboration. For all of us to go there, somebody lost a shoe in the mud. There was like 3 of us trying to help her get it out, but it was gone. We all had near panic attacks because the site we were at was near a power plant, and so we could feel the electricity from the overhead structures, and at the same time it was sort of reverberating the salt in this particular way, so you couldn't you could feel the salt just crusting on your whole body. You could feel this energy in your core. And so we were all really just we were unsettled, but also delighted by it. And it just was this great sort of equalizer. It just went away with any kind of, any of the decorum of like, oh, well, yes, we're going to work on this project. And that was really beautiful. And I love having experiences like that where everybody is coming together at the service of understanding something more deeply. And I think that often with a project like that, there were architects, there were scientists, there was me, an artist, and we were all, and then there were the people who, managed the logistics of the pavilion, who managed the PR. We were all having that experience together. And so that was a really wonderful collaboration that I was so happy to be a part of, even though I was not able to go, and they won the Golden Lion, which I'm so, so, so proud of. But I would like to do more of that in the future. I think the Public Art Fund project felt a little bit like a collaboration as well, because when we ran we had to make some promotional videos, and I actually asked some of the shop owners to speak on my behalf. And so I don't know, I think talking to people is a really crucial part of my work, and I have been very lucky to have had a couple of opportunities to collaborate, but I'm always looking for more. I feel like we need like interstitial question music. I always like to do, when I have visitors come talk to my students, I play the Jeopardy like wait music. But now it's too sad because Alex Trebek died.
My question has a couple of different parts.
Sure.
I am thinking a lot about how you said that decor is not arbitrary but loaded with meaning. And I'm wondering if you could expand on the nostalgia in this particular work that we're looking at, the nostalgia for the 70s, and then also for the sort of opulent hotels of the 1950s. I'm struck by that you're ruminating on how decor is loaded with meaning, and I'm curious about what that meaning might be in this particular work. The second part of my question is perhaps I'm zooming in and atomizing one very particular part of your talk, but you described the wallpaper as psychedelic. Mm-hmm. And it made me think about another artist, Rocha Yagmai, I don't know if you're familiar, who thinks about the psychedelic as a way of thinking through the otherness of diasporic hybridity. So those were the two aspects of my question. Thank you.
Can you say the name of the artist again?
Rocha Yagmai.
Oh, no, I don't think I know that artist, but I would love to get their name from you after. Yeah, those are great questions. I think in terms of, I think it's really, what did I do? Here. Oop, oh, no, it's working, sorry. I think it's really interesting that you mentioned nostalgia, because I think this work is only nostalgic because we're looking at it now, right? And so I think that I was really thinking about expanding on the time that was represented in a lot of these albums. So the 50s, but then all the way right up to the 70s and 80s. But I think what's particular about the 70s and 80s is that at that point, my grandmother had been in the US for 20 years, right? Her kids were now getting married and building houses. And so they were building homes of their own. They were sort of like building that life for themselves and making these decisions that had to do with, decor and design. So a lot of these images are from my aunt's house that was built in the 70s, either the 70s or the early 80s, but I think she was really still thinking about the design of the 70s. So that one is definitely 70s. That's the psychedelic wallpaper on Caseland Street. But then the mauve ones are sort of, late 70s, early 80s. And I think that they're, like I said, they're only really nostalgic because we're looking at them now and we've sort of designated mauve as like an uncool color. You'll never see mauve in the Pantone color of the year. It's like a color that's just relegated to bridesmaids' dresses. But I don't know, I think for me that was a way to sort of honor the time that a lot of the members of my family were coming into their own as Americans. And so they may have been, flipping through American interior decor magazines, or like going to Bloomingdale's or Macy's, going to the home decor section and thinking, what looks cool? What is popular? What are people buying? And at that time it was, shag rugs, mauve, a lot of sort of like what's that material that everybody's into, like postmodern furniture now, you know? But all of that stuff, and so when I look at it now, it's like, oh, that is of a particular time. I also want to point to the last wallpaper image. That is from my aunt's bathroom, the pink bathroom. And so it's like a framed piece that she bought in the 70s. It's just like an alphabet, you know, it's like a piece of like child's art. So it just says like A, B, C, D, E, and then each one has a corresponding image. But she wrote her kids' names onto each letter. And so half of her kids have Arabic names and half of her kids have American names. So for me, a lot of it has to do with assimilation and how people see themselves as part of a society that may not always accept them. So even though she's been in the country since she was born, Kathy, she still has to go to her local gas station and get told to go back to her own country, you know? And this is something that happened to her during Trump's election. And it was something that happened to me too, you know, and I consider myself partly an American. So, so I think for me, a lot of the politics in that shift is located in how things look in people's personal spaces that are solely theirs. In terms of the psychedelics, I haven't really thought of that too much, but I do think the 70s was interesting because it pulled from a lot of Oriental, or there was a lot of sort of Orientalism in what was considered cool and like the boho movement, you know. Thinking a lot about paisley clothing and sort of like floral headdresses. I think there was certainly a lot of appropriation of other cultures, particularly also of Native American culture, that we don't talk about when we think about you know, just like design or fashion through the ages.
Again, thank you for coming and sharing your story with us. I often say I like to go deep in the present. I think that's really important. And something you said to me, or that you said, is when you photograph something, that's the unknown. And to me, that's like life. You know, life goes on, and at some point, if you stop long enough, you will see a lot of things. So my question is, when did you know you had that gift, or accept that gift, or know that that was a talent that you could recognize?
Thank you so much. I think that's really beautifully put. I always like to bring up this quote by Susan Sontag, where she says that, you know, when people ask her how to be a good photographer, she says, all you have to do is pay attention. And so I really think that that's all it is somebody who looks closely at the world, not only how it looks, but why it looks the way it looks, and how there are all of these interconnected relationships that manifest in the visual world. And so for me, I didn't make a conscious decision to become a photographer. I actually wanted to be a musician. And I moved back home after college to pay off my undergraduate scholarship, and I had a 9-to-5 job, and I could not stop photographing. I would go out, I had a Mamiya 7, which is like a medium format film camera, and it was really hard to find film in the Emirates, and there was nowhere that processed it, so I would hoard film for 6 months, and then I'd go back to the US to visit my family and get it developed. So it was a very slow process, but it was something that I just found myself having to do. So I would go for walks after work, I'd go for walks on weekends, I'd drive around, and initially it was a way to understand, you know, what is this country that I grew up in and is changing so fast, has changed so fast in my 4 years away that I don't even recognize it as my own, and I can't reclaim it as my own. So a lot of it really stemmed from the experience of feeling totally lost and spun out of control, and the way that I found it again was by seeking understanding through the excuse of photographing and looking. And it's, you know, I unfortunately, because I have you know, I teach full time now, it's less possible to have that kind of everydayness in my practice, but my camera roll has about a bajillion pictures in it on my iPhone. I'm constantly looking at things, and when I do go home or when I do have time away, I'm always walking. I'm, you know, always sort of forcing myself not to be the naturally socially anxious person that I am. So I think it's out of necessity that that I started doing it, and it's out of necessity that I continue doing it too.
Thank you so much. We actually got married here last month, and so this was the backdrop of our wedding.
Oh my
so
God, I'm so honored.
We love it, and
Congratulations.
it'll be in our pictures in our house forever, I guess.
Oh my God, I love
but
that.
I actually had a question too. So I noticed that all of the women featured have faces that are covered in some way.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear more about that. And why did you choose to cover their faces with the items that you picked?
Yeah, so interestingly enough, even when I work with more traditional portraiture, there's usually some aspect of identity that's being hidden. That's changing more and more as I work more, but it started off as a way to still work with the women in my community in the Emirates, many of whom don't want their faces shown for religious reasons or familial reasons or just out of privacy. But a lot of them are artists and liked the idea of working on a collaborative portrait together. And so I wanted to think about how to sort of make work that felt dynamic and specific to certain people without needing to be involved with the history of photography that's so much about showing the face, showing the eyes, demanding this vulnerability of people who, were lending me their image for the rest of, basically forever, because JPEGs live on. So I wanted to be sensitive about that and think about how you could still really get that feeling, access the moment, access the sort of like energy that was reverberating in the room without seeing how somebody was reacting to it. And I think it also, one of the issues that I found when I moved to the US a couple of years ago was that there were constant questions or demands to explain what it was like in that part of the world. And I felt like I could avoid that conversation by forcing people to look at other things. And so I continued that tradition a little bit with this work because in a way, I wanted to protect the identity of a lot of my family members. Arabs and Muslims in particular are quite private. So the idea of a family archive or of family photographs is still pretty new to us as a culture. In the Emirates, we don't even have a public archive of family photographs until maybe until the first point and shoots came out in the 80s and 90s, but now it's only really becoming a thing with camera phones. Before that, all of the photographs in our public archive were photographs taken by visitors, people who were from the British military, who were anthropologists, who were doctors, who were people basically as part of the imperialist project. And so they're very anthropologically oriented. It's like people just standing, and you can see their faces, and they're just standing in a space, and that's it. There's like no decision, there's no affect. They're supposed to be just information. So I was thinking about that and thinking about how the family archive is like the opposite of that. So I wanted to work with still allowing the presence of the women that I care about. My Aunt Kathy, so the reason why I covered her with a cookbook was because she really carries on the tradition of the sort of matron of the family. She loves to cook. She is currently mad at me because I might not go to her house for Thanksgiving. But she's constantly in the kitchen just nurturing people. And so I love that she is covered with a recipe book, but then also a sticker that says spaghetti in English, but it says macarona in Arabic, which is macaroni, so it's actually an incorrect translation. But again, it's like looking at these objects of translation. I actually do not know who the woman holding the basket of flowers is, but she is covered with a piece of floral. She was one of the members of my grandmother's Lebanese family who we sort of lost track of in the emigration from Lebanon. So, and because my grandmother passed away and there is all of the information about who those people are is anecdotal, we just don't have it anymore. Which is partially why I'm trying to do this, is to like sort of collect and centralize a lot of these stories that are just like, who's that again? And who was married to who? And to almost create a family tree. Because again, culturally, that's not really something that we do. And then the other one, that's my cousin Susie getting ready for her wedding day. And I think that's my Aunt Kathy fixing her veil. And she's just covered with a sort of decorative rose. And the image behind her is of a sort of embroidery. It's like I bought a lot of like embroidery details back when I was sewing, and that one felt really right for what was happening in the image. And then in the Kimball Hotel piece on the end, that's my grandmother and I believe my aunt. Let me find the JPEG for you so you don't have to look back there. And so you see there are symbols. There's the menu from the Hotel Kimball where she worked. There's also a postcard I found on eBay from somebody who stayed there around that time, and it just says, "We're all safe." There's fake lettuce and strawberries. She was also allergic to strawberries, shrimp, and then that image, and this sort of like buffet table skirt. So to me, this was a sort of collage that honored some of those stories. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. That might be a good place for us to wrap as we're getting to the top of the hour. So I want to thank you, Farah, for flying to St. Louis to be here with us tonight to talk about this work. And thank you for working on this project throughout what was a challenging year for many of us. And it's been a pleasure to watch you think about this space and watch that process evolve. Like, as we worked on this project, I think there were a couple of different evolutions. And I think the final work is just so captivating, and we've really enjoyed spending time with the public talking about it. So thank you so much for all of your energy and labor and love of this work. I think it shows, so thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you all for coming out tonight. Please come back, see the show many times, and we'll hope to see you another night. Have a good evening.